Hello everyone out there in YouTube land. This is Charlie, the Commie preacher, and here, welcome to another Church of the Revolution YouTube video where we preach one thing: Jesus was a communist. Today, the message of this video is that the true revolutionary is guided by strong feelings of love, as said by Che Guevara. Che Guevara was a Cuban revolutionary, one of the people who helped bring the Communist Party of Cuba to power in Cuba. He eventually left Cuba and was killed by right-wing anti-communists during a failed revolution. I believe it was in Bolivia, and he's, I believe, actually from Bolivia. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to defend the life and career of Che Guevara. I'm just going to highlight this particular quote, because I think it's easy for communists to lose sight of love, to forget why we want a global revolution, why we want to upend and overturn the death systems of capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, oligarchy. We want to overturn those systems because of love. We're doing it out of a love for humanity. And that's not something that most communists talk about very much. They'll talk about dedication, commitment, justice. All those things are real and important. But I want to talk today about love. And so, if I'm going to talk about love, I'm going to talk about what in the world is love from a radical Jesus perspective, from the perspective of the revolutionary Jesus. So we're going to go to Matthew 25. This is a chapter that I haven't really focused a lot on. Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 31 and continuing to verse 46. This is a fairly famous passage known as the judgment of the sheep and the goats. And what I like about this passage, there's some things I don't love about the passage, but that's neither here nor there, because I do love it. It was a critical passage. Back when I was a young 20-something Christian, I had been raised with the idea that God was a God of perfect justice and perfect righteousness, and God cared about every single sin that you committed, and the only way you could get into heaven is if you repented of every single sin you committed as soon as you committed it and you realized it was wrong and you stopped. You're supposed to repent right away, say, God, forgive me so I don't go to hell. Then, this passage was the beginning of the transformation of that outlook for me. Because in this passage, Jesus talks about the judgment of the nations at the end of time. And there's some things that are not commonly understood about this passage, but since you may or may not have ever heard the passage, I'm going to read it in my inclusive language translation. I'm going to substitute words here and there where I think even the inclusive language translation is not ideal or doesn't carry the same strength. So it says that at the appointed time, the promised one will come in glory, escorted by all the messengers of the universe, sitting upon the seat of justice, and all the nations will be assembled before the seat of justice. And the promised one will begin separating them from one another as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. So who is being divided here? Is it individuals or is it nations? and this is the first thing I want to emphasize, this is about nations. It's not about individuals. A nation is a collective. A nation is a culture. Probably the best term for the Greek word here, which is ethnoi. And we need to remember that Jesus probably spoke Aramaic, although he might have also spoke Greek. We debate this. Scholars debate whether Jesus spoke Greek or not. The Gospels are written in Greek. The question is whether the Gospels have an Aramaic background. But it's still interesting to look at what the Aramaic words are. And the Aramaic word for nations is probably the word Gentiles. The word, it's saying people who are not Jewish. But I want to emphasize that they chose this Greek word, ethnoi, which means ethnic. Essentially means ethnic group. But it means a group. It never really means a collection of individuals, because your nation, even today, how are you a member of the United States if you live here in the U.S., or if you live in England, how are you a member of that nation? You're born into it, or you've been given citizenship. And that puts certain obligations on you, and you're participating in the systems that hold your nation together. And I believe in this passage, what is in view is the systems of nations, the ways in which nations get things done. And Jesus judges those nations by certain things that they either get done or don't get done. So again, I don't believe, and I'm going to underline this, I don't believe this passage is at all about individual behavior. It's about collective systems and how they do or do not fulfill the requirements of the promised one. It's also known as the Son of Man, as the promised one who will come and lead humanity through this judgment, will lead humanity into the communism of love, which is what I preach here. The promised one will say to those on the right, "Come, you blessed of my mother goddess." See a previous video where I talk about a radical God and why I use the phrase mother goddess. "Come, you blessed of my mother goddess, inherit the regime prepared for you from the creation of the earth. For I was hungry, you fed me. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Naked, and you clothed me. I was ill, and you comforted me. In prison, and you came to visit me." And then these will ask, "When did we see you hungry and feed you? Or see you thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or clothe you in your nakedness? When did we see you ill or in prison and come to visit you?" And the promised one will answer them, "The truth is, every time you did this for the least of my siblings, my brothers and sisters, you did it for me." So again, this is the collectives of nations that are being judged. Not individual behavior, although individual behavior is a part of nations. But I don't believe that it's really focused on whether an individual feeds the hungry more than it is the nation, the ethnoi, the collective, capable of generating food for the hungry, drink for the thirsty, clothing for the naked, welcome for strangers. So all of these are about economic policy, about clothing production, about immigration and travel policies of a nation, about how that nation treats people who are imprisoned, and how it treats people who are sick. So it's about healthcare. It's about imprisonment. These are social issues, even though they're described somewhat individualistically. Jesus says, "I was hungry." Well, when did we see you hungry? And he says, "When you do it to any of these people." And so Jesus is saying Jesus, or at least the promised one, Is Jesus the promised one? Traditional orthodoxy says he is. I leave it as an open question. I don't take a position strongly one way or another. I have reason to doubt that he is, but the passage isn't entirely clear. The passage that used the phrase Son of Man, which is translated here, promised one, it doesn't get explained what Jesus uses, and he does seem to use it to refer to himself. But nevertheless, the promised one, the person who is on the judgment seat, call it a throne, but I call it a judgment seat, is judging the nations, deciding which ones have truly cared for the poor and the hungry. And why does this have anything to do with the strong feelings of love? Have you ever been in real need? Have you ever been hungry and someone helped you? You know, I grew up fairly well off. I mean, I don't say not fairly well off. I grew up comfortable in terms of food. I don't know that I ever went hungry a day in my life. I never went without anything to drink. I never went without clothing, although my mother struggled to keep me in clothing because, like a lot of young boys, I ripped my jeans a lot, my corduroys, I ripped them a lot, and she would have to replace them or repair them or patch them. My family wasn't wealthy, but we were, you know, I would say lower middle class, upper working class level income. My father was a minister, he made a living, and we had a house provided for us by the churches known as a parsonage. And that said, I think the phrase in here that really touches on this question of love for me, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I have felt unwelcome so much of my life. Like I don't belong. These people that I'm seeing, they're not my people. I shouldn't be here. And sometimes it's people I really wanted to embrace and accept me, but because I'm weird or because I'm different, they don't welcome me. So that's the one that, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I've been sick and I've had people care for me when I'm sick. I've never been in prison. Don't know what that's like, but oh my God, I can imagine, the way prisoners feel isolated and rejected and not cared for. This may sound a little too sentimental for communism. Communism is about eliminating capitalism and replacing it with a system from each according to ability to each according to need. But that's love. Love is me giving to you as I'm able and receiving from you as you are able. Giving and receiving. It's really love. The true revolutionary is guided by strong feelings of love. And it's love for the poor. It's love for the thirsty. It's love for the stranger. Love for the naked. Love for the sick. Love for the prisoner. Love. And if you watch the video I did about healing, you'll understand that there's even if we are part of the poor, we can become captives of the systems of domination and death. We can begin to view the world through their eyes rather than through our own eyes, through our own eyes of being poor. We can believe that I'm poor because I deserve it, or that I should become rich and capitulate to the system and become an exploiter and an oppressor and benefit from the harm of others. And so I come back to always that my communism is based on love. It's not based on hating rich people, although Jesus in the later part of the same passage says, I was hungry and you didn't give me food. I was thirsty, you didn't give me a drink. And therefore you will be punished. You will be corrected. Actually, the word is you will be corrected for an era, for an age. Now, I know that most English translations say eternally punished, but that's a mistranslation of the Greek word. It's you will be corrected for an age. But I'm not here to argue whether there is such a thing as eternal punishment. Maybe I'll do another video on eternal punishment. It matters here because I am a communist and I believe that the poor are given communism of love on earth. Heaven is on earth, and so hell, in a certain sense, is also on earth, or the correction of the wicked, the oppressors, the ruling class. They must be transformed. Now, many Marxists, and maybe this is where love comes in, many Marxists believe you simply have to wipe out the ruling class, just kill them all. I've never been able to come to that conclusion. And I think it's because of love, because they're human. Yes, they've gotten caught up in a system that benefits them, and they often maliciously harm the poor. But they're human. They can unlearn harming the poor. If we give them, but we have to work at it. It's not something they're going to do of their own, quote, free will. They do deserve radical correction. I don't believe, though, that we simply should exterminate the ruling class. We should basically imprison them and correct them. Re-education. In fact, the whole theme of this series that I've been doing is on Lent, on where Jesus said, repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. We translate that as reorient for the divine regime is at hand. Because the communism of love is at hand, reorient yourself. So what I often say is I'm a just revolution communist. I believe in just revolution, a revolution that is carried out with strict standards of justice, strict standards of proof, and prosecution of the poor and the rich, prosecution of the rich, not the poor, and the correction of the rich. Does that mean I believe we should never kill rich people? War is dirty. War is ugly. I believe we're going to be facing a civil war on a global scale. Nations are going to erupt within over the rich versus the poor, because the rich are going to be the ones who are going to arm to try to wipe out the poor as much as possible. And communists have to be on the side of the poor when the rich go on the warpath. And yes, we will need to defend the poor. Absolutely. So I'm not a strict pacifist. I will do a video on war and pacifism and revolution in the future. But right now, I focus on love, because I think that in order to prosecute a revolution using violence where necessary, we need to have love so that we're truly discerning where and when violence may or may not be necessary, because in many cases it is not necessary, and we can achieve our ends without it. So I am doing this video today to try to get a message out there of love. That the communism of love that I preach is a communism that has never been seen, except in exceptional individuals and organizations that have carried out love in powerful ways. I actually believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights movement, his portion of it that he led, was a movement of love. I also believe that the Black Panthers were a movement of love. I don't see a hard dichotomy between what King did and what the Black Panthers did. I see a continuum. They're connected to each other. Both are guided by love. The Panthers were more passionate and more willing to use violence, whereas the civil rights, the Dr. King followers, were trained not to use violence. And like I said, that's a subject for an entire video, but right now what I want to emphasize is that even if we do justify violence in the name of revolution. We must be guided by love. Otherwise, that violence can become indiscriminate. It can become, and has throughout history become, indiscriminate. And we don't want to repeat those mistakes. We want the next revolution to be just amazing, just to be perfect. It won't be perfect, but we want to at least strive for true love in the revolution that is coming. And I believe it's coming. I don't believe we can avoid it. So thank you once again for coming to the Church of the Revolution channel. Remember, Jesus was a communist. I, the Commie preacher, I love you. If you have any questions about my videos, if you have any questions about the Church of the Revolution, don't hesitate to comment on a video or even email me. My email will be included in the video description. So, we're trying to launch an online church here, and I'm really serious and dedicated and committed to it. And I want, someday to meet as many of you as are followers and subscribers and fans, if you will, of the Church of the Revolution and the Commie Preacher. I want to meet as many of you as possible. So someday I may come to your town. So please do follow me, because this is a revolution of love that I am trying to launch here. At least a part of it. I believe the revolution is bigger than anything I can imagine. Well, I can imagine it, but it's bigger than anything I can have much of an impact on. I have a small role to play in the emergence of a revolution of love on this planet. And I want to play it with all my heart and all my talent and all my abilities. But in the end, it's not about me. It's about love. It's about the revolution. It's about liberating the poor and the hungry and the LGBTQ community and people of color, black, indigenous people of color, from domination by the death systems. It's all about that, and it's about liberating the earth from capitalist industrial production so that the earth can begin to grow back into its natural beauty and even achieve beauty that we have never seen before. Basically, I'm calling for heaven on earth. That's an earlier video, but it's still true. And love is what makes heaven on earth. Peace out, comrades.